I still remember the sound of that old screen door creaking open every morning. It was like the heartbeat of this house, the rhythm of my days for more than 40 years. I'd step out with my cup of coffee, sit on the porch, and watch the mist lift off the fields. This small town, it has a way of holding memories. The church bell in the distance, the old gas station sign that hasn't changed since 1975, and the same maple tree my husband planted when our first son was born. It's all still here, everything, except the people who once filled this house with laughter. I raised 2 children here, Michael and Sarah. Michael, my eldest, was the quiet one, always tinkering with things, fixing broken radios, taking apart clocks. Sarah was different and full of color, energy, and wild dreams that didn't fit inside a small town. When my husband, George, passed away,
I looked at her, my little girl who once used to hold my hand when she was afraid of thunder, who used to call me her best friend, and all I could think was, when did I become unwanted? When did love turn into burden? I had been staying with them for 6 months. After my husband passed, my daughter insisted I come live with her family. She said it would be good for me, that she didn't want me to be alone. I believed her. I thought love still meant the same thing it used to, but that night, her words told me otherwise. I didn't shout. I didn't ask why. I simply nodded, stood up slowly, and walked toward my small room at the end of the hallway. As I closed the door, I could hear their voices, faintly whispers between a husband and wife, voices that once made me feel included, now shutting me out. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the packed suitcase that had been sitting there for weeks, half ready, just in case. Maybe deep down, I knew this moment was coming. The world outside was quiet, except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. Funny how rain can sound like footsteps leaving. And as I sat there, I whispered to myself, I raised her to be strong. Maybe she's just showing me she doesn't need anyone anymore. Maybe that's what a mother is, someone who teaches love only to be forgotten by it. I didn't cry that night, not yet, because sometimes, when your heart is too heavy, the tears know it's not the right time. That was the night my daughter told me I was no longer needed, and that was the night I began to understand what it truly means to be alone. When I think back to how everything began, it almost feels like another lifetime, a different world, a world where laughter lived in the walls of our little house, and where my daughter's giggles could make any bad day disappear. Her name is Emily. She was my only child, the light of my life, my reason to get up in the morning, even when I was too tired to keep going. Her father, David, was a quiet man, a hard worker, honest and steady. He wasn't one to talk much, but when he looked at Emily, his whole face softened. She had that effect on him, on both of us. We didn't have much, just a small 2-bedroom house and dreams that kept us warm during the cold nights. I used to sew clothes for extra income, and David worked at the factory. Money was always tight, but love was never short. Every evening after dinner, Emily would sit at the table while I mended clothes. She'd tell me stories about her school, about how her teacher praised her handwriting, how she wanted to be a doctor one day. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on my lap, and I'd hum the same lullaby my mother once sang to me. I remember the smell of her hair, a mix of soap and sunshine. Those are the kind of memories that never fade, no matter how old you get. When she turned 12, David fell sick. At first, it was small things: coughing, tiredness. Then came the hospital visits, the long nights sitting by his bedside, the fear that I tried so hard to hide. Emily was too young to understand everything, but she was old enough to feel the tension. She'd sit quietly, holding my hand, whispering, "Mom, he'll be okay, right?" And I'd say yes, even when I wasn't sure anymore. When David passed away, it was like a piece of our home went with him. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. But Emily, she was my reason to stay strong. I remember holding her tight at the funeral and telling her, "It's just you and me now, sweetheart, and that's enough." From that day on, I devoted my life to her. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, it was all for her. I wanted her to have everything I couldn't. I worked longer hours, took on small jobs, cleaning houses, sewing uniforms, baking bread for the neighbors. There were days my back ached so badly I could barely stand, but then I'd see Emily studying at the kitchen table, her hair falling over her notebook, and I'd feel strength again. She was so determined, so kind. Even as a teenager, she'd surprise me washing dishes without being asked, bringing me a blanket when she saw me napping in the chair. People would tell me, "You're lucky, Margaret. She's a good girl." And I'd smile and say, "I know. She's my blessing." When she went to college, I thought my heart would burst from pride and loneliness all at once. We packed her bags together, folded every piece of clothing like it was made of gold. I slipped a little note inside one of her books that said, "Never forget where home is." She cried when she found it. She called me that night and said, "I'll never forget, Mom." For a few years, everything felt right. She studied hard, made friends, met a young man named Daniel, the one who would later become her husband. When she brought him home for the first time, he was polite and quiet like David had been. I liked him. He treated her well, and that was enough for me. Their wedding day was small but beautiful. I wore a pale blue dress and held back my tears as she walked down the aisle. When she said "I do," I saw the same light in her eyes that I once had when I married her father. After that, life changed again. They moved to the city, and I stayed in our old house. I visited sometimes, bringing homemade pies or small gifts. She always welcomed me warmly, though our conversations slowly grew shorter. She was busy with work, with marriage, with her own growing world. That's how it's supposed to be, I told myself. Children build their own lives. Mothers step back and watch with pride, even if it hurts a little. Years passed. I got older, the walks to the market felt longer. The house felt colder, and on quiet nights, I'd find myself talking to David's picture, telling him how our little girl was doing well, even though I hadn't heard from her in weeks. When she called to tell me they were expecting their first child, my heart nearly burst with joy. I knitted tiny socks before she even showed me the ultrasound. I told everyone at church, "I'm going to be a grandmother." The day her baby was born, I held that tiny boy in my arms and felt something magical. It was like holding a piece of my past and future at the same time. I whispered in his ear, "You're the reason I'll live a little longer." But then life started shifting in small, almost invisible ways. Emily stopped calling as often. When I visited, she seemed distracted, her phone buzzing, her eyes tired. Daniel was polite but distant, always working, always busy. Still, I told myself it was normal. Everyone had their own life to live. I didn't want to be the kind of mother who complained or clung too much. Then one day, Daniel called me. He said they were moving to a bigger house, one with a backyard closer to good schools. He said they wanted me to move in with them, so I wouldn't be alone anymore. I cried when I heard that. I thought, they still care. They still want me near. So I sold my house, the one that held every memory of David, every laughter of Emily's childhood. I packed it all into a few boxes, kissed the doorway goodbye, and moved into their new home. It was a big, beautiful house. Bright walls, shiny floors, new smells. But it didn't feel like mine. Emily greeted me with a warm hug that first day. "Mom, this will be good for you," she said. "You won't have to worry about anything anymore." I believed her. I wanted to believe her. I had a small room at the end of the hall, cozy, with a little window overlooking the garden. I decorated it with family photos, some books, and David's old clock. Every morning, I'd wake up early, make breakfast, and wait for them to come downstairs. At first, they seemed happy I was there. I'd cook, babysit, help with laundry. When Emily came home late from work, I'd have dinner ready. When the baby cried at night, I'd be the first to reach him. Those moments made me feel useful again, like I still had a purpose. But slowly, almost without realizing it, I began to notice changes. Emily would sigh when she saw me doing chores. Daniel would thank me less and less. Sometimes, when they talked in the living room, their voices would lower when I entered. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe they were tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. But the air in the house began to feel heavier, like I was intruding in a space that no longer wanted me. And though I didn't know it yet, that quiet tension would soon turn into something I could never forget. That night, the one when my daughter told me I was no longer needed, didn't just happen suddenly. It began here, in those silent days when love started to fade into obligation. The first few months in my daughter's home felt like a dream. I'd wake up early, open the curtains, and watch the sunlight spill into the kitchen. The smell of coffee, the sound of the baby laughing, it all made me feel alive again. Every morning, I'd make breakfast before they woke up. Emily would smile and say, "Thanks, Mom," though sometimes it sounded more like a habit than real gratitude. Still, I didn't mind. Just hearing her call me Mom made me happy. I helped wherever I could. I washed dishes, folded laundry, swept the floors, watched my grandson when they went to work. It felt good to be useful, to have purpose again. But slowly, I began to notice the little things. The moments that didn't feel quite right. The silences that seemed heavier than they used to be. One evening, I made Emily's favorite stew, the same one I used to make when she was little. I spent hours preparing it. humming softly to myself. When she came home, I greeted her with a smile. I made your favorite, sweetheart, I said. The one with the herbs you loved. She looked at the pot, then at me. Oh, Mom, I actually ordered takeout. Daniel wanted Thai tonight. Her words were gentle, but the look in her eyes was distant, almost guilty. I forced a smile and said, that's all right. Maybe tomorrow, but that night. I sat alone at the kitchen table, eating the stew by myself. I told myself it didn't matter. It was just one meal, just a busy day. But the next week, it happened again and again. Soon, I stopped cooking unless they asked me to. And even then, Emily would taste the food and add a bit more salt or sauce, quietly correcting it without saying much. It wasn't cruel, just indifferent. And somehow, that indifference hurt more than any harsh word could. Sometimes, I'd try to talk to her while she scrolled through her phone. How's work, sweetheart? I'd ask. She'd glance up, smile politely, and say, busy, Mom, always busy. Then she'd look back down, her thumbs moving faster than her eyes. Daniel was kind enough, but we didn't talk much either. He'd nod when I greeted him, thank me for watching the baby, and disappear into his office. At dinner, the three of us would sit together, yet it often felt like I was invisible. I noticed they spoke more to each other than to me. Sometimes, they'd exchange looks I couldn't quite read. And every time I tried to join the conversation, the topic would quietly change. Still, I told myself, they're young. They have their own worries. I didn't want to be a burden. So, I started keeping to my room more often. I'd sit by the window, knitting small things, watching the garden. When I heard them laughing in the living room, I'd smile softly, telling myself that as long as they were happy, that was enough. But even quiet hearts can feel when they're being left behind. One day, Emily asked me not to pick up her son from daycare anymore. Mom, it's not that I don't trust you, she said gently, but we've hired a babysitter who can follow our schedule better. I nodded, pretending it didn't sting. But after she left, I sat on my bed and held the little shoes I used to help him tie every morning. I whispered, I just wanted to help. The house started to feel less like a home, and more like a guest room I was overstaying in. Even the little things changed. Emily began organizing the kitchen, differently, moving plates, rearranging spices. I'd reach for something and realize it wasn't where I left it. She never said it directly, but her actions spoke clearly. This is my house, not yours. So, I learned to ask before touching anything. I learned to wait before speaking. And every night, I'd sit on the edge of my bed, staring at the family photos on my nightstand, wondering when love turned into quiet distance. Then came the day of the argument, if you could even call it that. It wasn't shouting or anger. It was just disappointment hanging in the air. Emily came home early, looking tired. Daniel was upstairs, and the baby was sleeping. I was sitting in the living room, folding laundry. She looked at me and said, Mom, can we talk? Her tone was calm, but my heart started to race. She sat beside me, hands clasped together. Mom, she began softly, you've done so much for us. I don't even know how to thank you. But, that word but, it always carries a storm. She continued, Daniel and I have been talking. We just think it might be better if you took some time for yourself. Maybe visit friends or go back to your house for a while. Emily came home early, looking tired. Daniel was upstairs, and the baby was sleeping. I was sitting in the living room, folding laundry. She looked at me and said, Mom, can we talk? Her tone was calm, but my heart started to race. She sat beside me, hands clasped together. Mom, she began softly, you've done so much for us. I don't even know how to thank you. But, that word but, it always carries a storm. She continued, Daniel and I have been talking. We just think it might be better if you took some time for yourself. Maybe visit friends or go back to your house for a while. I froze. I tried to understand what she meant. My house? I asked quietly. You mean the one I sold when I moved here? She looked away. I mean, maybe we can help you find something smaller, something nearby. I stared at her hands. They looked so much like mine, but colder. Somehow, I wanted to ask her why. Why wasn't I enough anymore? Why did my presence, my love, suddenly feel like an inconvenience? But instead, I just nodded. I understand, I whispered. And she smiled, relieved. Maybe, she said. I knew you'd understand, Mom. Then she stood up and left the room. I sat there for a long time, holding a folded towel in my lap, staring at the door that had just closed. That was the first time I felt like a guest in my own daughter's life. After that, things changed faster. Emily stopped asking for help with anything. Daniel avoided long conversations, and I began to disappear quietly, piece by piece. I still woke up early, but I didn't make breakfast anymore. I still watched my grandson play, but from the doorway, not the floor. I still smiled when Emily walked by, but the smile never reached my eyes. The distance grew thicker, like fog filling every corner of the house. And then came the night that would change everything, the night when silence turned into words that would echo in my heart forever. It was late, maybe 9 p.m. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the hum of the fridge. I was sitting in my room, knitting, when I heard them talking in the hallway. I didn't mean to listen, but their voices carried softly through the door. Daniel said, "She's trying, but it's getting uncomfortable, Em. We barely have space. You're stressed all the time." And Emily replied, I know. I didn't think it would be this hard. She's always here, always doing things. I feel like I can't breathe in my own home." My hands froze. The yarn slipped from my fingers. Always here, can't breathe. I wanted to stop hearing. I wanted to unhear everything. Daniel said, "You have to talk to her, Em. Be honest." And she whispered, "I will. Tomorrow." I sat there in silence, the words wrapping around me like cold air. Tears welled up, but I didn't let them fall. Instead, I looked at the half-finished sweater in my lap, the one I was knitting for my grandson, and whispered, "It's okay. I'll finish it tomorrow. Maybe that will be my goodbye gift." That was the night I realized I didn't belong anymore, not because anyone told me directly, but because love had quietly packed its bags and left the house long before I did. I barely slept that night. When the morning came, the house felt colder than usual. I made coffee for myself quietly, without waking anyone. As I sat at the table, I looked around the bright kitchen, the walls filled with family photos, the toys scattered on the floor, the sunlight touching the curtains. It was beautiful, but it wasn't mine. And I think that's when I knew something was about to end. That morning, I felt something in the air. It's strange how the heart knows before the mind does. The sunlight coming through the curtains felt colder, the house quieter. Even the coffee didn't taste the same. I moved slowly, folding the blanket on the couch, straightening the picture frames, doing the little things that made me feel useful. But inside, I felt heavy, like I was walking through memories that no longer belonged to me. Emily came downstairs later than usual. She looked tired, her hair tied up, eyes puffy as if she hadn't slept much. When she saw me, she smiled faintly. "Morning, Mom," she said, her voice soft but uneasy. I smiled back. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" She nodded but didn't meet my eyes. Then she said, "Can we talk tonight? After dinner?" I froze for just a moment, then forced a calm nod. "Of course." She smiled again. The kind of smile people wear when they've already made up their mind. The whole day felt like I was waiting for a storm that refused to arrive. I kept myself busy washing dishes, dusting shelves, watering the plants. Every small sound made me jump. The ticking clock, the door creaking, even the hum of the refrigerator. I caught myself watching Emily and Daniel as they went about their day. They looked normal, talking softly, sharing small smiles, going through the motions, a family life. But I knew something was building beneath that calm surface. When evening came, I prepared dinner quietly, nothing fancy, just a simple soup and bread. We ate together, though barely a word was spoken. Every clink of the spoon against the bowl sounded too loud. The baby laughed at one point, and that small sound was the only warmth in the room. After dinner, Emily cleared her throat. "Daniel, can you take Liam upstairs for his bath?" she asked. He nodded and took the baby, smiling gently at me, as if to soften what was coming. And then it was just us, mother and daughter, sitting in the dimly lit kitchen, the smell of soup still lingering in the air. For a while, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint sound of running water upstairs. Then Emily looked at me and said quietly, "Mom, I need to tell you something." I smiled faintly. "I know, sweetheart. Go on." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Mom, please don't take this the wrong way. You've done so much for us, and I'll never forget that. But we've been thinking," her voice broke slightly, then steadied again. "We think it's time for you to have your own space. Maybe somewhere peaceful. You've done enough for us, Mom. You deserve rest. You shouldn't have to take care of us anymore." For a few seconds, I didn't say anything. The words floated in the air like dust in sunlight. I could feel my heart tightening, not breaking, just slowly closing in on itself. I whispered, "You mean, you don't need me here anymore?" She flinched. "Mom, please don't say it like that. It's not that we don't love you. It's just that you don't need me," I said softly. There was no anger in my voice, just quiet understanding. The kind that comes from seeing the truth long before hearing it. She sighed, tears welling in her eyes. "Mom, I'm just trying to make things easier for everyone. You've always been there for me, but I feel guilty now. You shouldn't be spending your days waiting around for us." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, that I didn't mind the waiting, the quiet, the small chores, that every moment near her. And My grandson was a gift, but I knew the decision had already been made, so I smiled the same way I used to when she was a little girl, when I didn't want her to see me cry. "I understand, sweetheart," I said. "You have your life now. I don't want to be in the way." She reached for my hand, but her fingers barely touched mine. "Mom, it's not that you're in the way," she said softly. "It's just, we need our own space. You've done more than enough." Her voice trembled at the word enough. It echoed in my chest, heavy, final. Enough. I nodded slowly, looking at her face, the same face I had kissed goodnight for 20 years. The same face I had worried over during fevers, heartbreaks, and exams. Now that face was asking me to leave, gently, but firmly. "I see," I said, my voice steady though my heart wasn't. "I guess every bird needs to fly without the nest someday." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I'll start looking for a small place," I added, forcing a small smile. "Somewhere nearby, so I can still see Liam sometimes." Her eyes softened with relief. "Thank you, Mom. You're amazing. I knew you'd understand." She leaned forward to hug me, and I hugged her back. But this time, I didn't hold her tightly. I let go first. That night, after she went upstairs, I stayed in the kitchen alone. The lights were dim, and the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock. I looked around the sink I had scrubbed every morning, the fridge where I'd pinned Liam's drawings, the table where we'd shared so many dinners. Everything looked the same, but it no longer felt like mine. I walked to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands trembled slightly as I folded a small sweater, the one I had knitted for Liam's birthday. I traced the stitches with my fingers, thinking of all the nights I stayed awake knitting while everyone else slept. And then, without meaning to, I whispered aloud, "Maybe they're right. Maybe they don't need me anymore." The words felt heavy in the air, but beneath the sadness. And as I began to walk, I realized something. Sometimes, love doesn't disappear. It just changes its place. That night, the night my daughter said, "We don't need you here," didn't break me. It simply reminded me that even when the world closes one door, a mother's heart always stays open. That night, after they all went to sleep, I sat by the window for a long time. The house was quiet, but inside my heart, there was a storm. I looked outside. The porch light was dim, and the cold air moved the curtains softly. I could hear the faint ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the refrigerator. Everything looked the same, yet everything felt so different. For years, this house had been full of laughter. I had cooked meals here, rocked my granddaughter to sleep, decorated the Christmas tree. And now, it felt like I was a stranger standing in someone else's home. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to stand up for myself, but I couldn't, because deep down, I knew my daughter wasn't cruel. She was just tired, overwhelmed. Maybe she had been carrying more than I could see. That night, I whispered to myself, maybe it's time to go. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't want to be a burden to the one person I loved the most. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky with soft orange light. I quietly made breakfast, eggs, toast, and coffee, just the way my daughter liked it. It was my way of saying goodbye without words. When she came into the kitchen, she looked surprised. "Mom, you didn't have to do this," she said. I smiled softly. "I wanted to. Sit down, have some coffee." She sat down, and for a moment, we both just existed in silence, two women, mother and daughter, sitting across from each other, with years of love and misunderstanding between us. I finally spoke, my voice gentle. "Sweetheart, I think it's time I go. Back to my old house. You have your own life now, your own family. I don't want to be in the way." Her eyes widened. "Love than any happy day ever could." Sometimes I still remember her exact words. "We don't need you here." Back then, they echoed in my mind like thunder. Now, when I think of them, I no longer feel pain. I feel understanding. Because I've learned that people say things they don't mean when their hearts are tired. And sometimes love needs space to breathe even if it hurts. Life has become simpler now. My mornings start with the soft sound of birds outside my window, and the smell of coffee brewing on the stove. I sit by the same rocking chair, watching the sunlight paint golden lines on the floor. I take care of my small garden, each flower, a reminder that even things once forgotten can bloom again if given a little care. When I water them, I think of my daughter, of the little girl she used to be, the one who once held my hand so tightly at the school gate, the one who once whispered, "Mom, don't ever leave me." And now, even though she doesn't say it, I know a part of her still feels that way. Every Sunday, she calls. Sometimes we talk about recipes, sometimes about my granddaughter's school. Other times, we just sit in silence, listening to each other breathe through the phone. The kind of silence that doesn't need words. A few weeks ago, she said something that made my heart swell. She said, "Mom, I finally understand what you did for me. I couldn't see it before. I smiled quietly and said, "It's okay, darling. Love is patient. It waits until the heart is ready to see." She cried softly on the other end of the line, and I let her, because sometimes tears are just love trying to speak. A few days later, a small envelope arrived at my door. Inside, there was a hand-drawn picture from my granddaughter of a house with 2 windows and a big tree. And in front of the house, 2 stick figures holding hands. One said Mommy. The other said Grandma. Underneath, in shaky handwriting, she had written, "We always need you." I held that paper against my heart for a long time. It felt like the world had given me back what I had lost, not in the same way, but in a softer, truer form. I realize now that love isn't about being needed every day. It's about being remembered, even in silence. It's about knowing that your presence shaped someone's world, even if they forget to say thank you. Sometimes, love looks like distance. Sometimes, it sounds like quiet phone calls. Sometimes, it just feels like peace after a storm. And that peace is worth everything. When I walk through my little garden in the evenings, I often talk to the flowers as if they can hear me. I tell them stories of laughter, of pain, of forgiveness. I tell them about my daughter, and how we both had to lose a little piece of each other to truly find our hearts again. And as the sun sets, I whisper softly, love always finds its way back. Sometimes through words, sometimes through time, and sometimes through silence. Now, when my granddaughter visits, she runs straight into my arms. Her tiny voice always says, "Grandma, you smell like home." And I realize maybe that's what I've always been. Not someone who needs to be there all the time, but someone whose love can be felt even from far away. Because love, real love, doesn't ask for a place. It builds one in the heart. That night, when my daughter said, "We don't need you here," I thought it was the end of my story. But now I know it was the beginning of a new one. A story about letting go without bitterness. About understanding that family isn't about living under one roof, but living in each other's hearts, even when miles apart. A story about a mother learning that love doesn't fade, it simply changes its home. So if anyone listening tonight has ever felt unwanted, if you've ever been told you're not needed anymore, remember this. Your worth doesn't disappear just because someone fails to see it. You are still loved. You are still light. And one day, someone will remind you of that in the gentlest way. Until then, hold on to peace, because sometimes peace is